Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Comic Book Wednesday. This is the day of the week when Michael K. Vaughan and I combine the forces of stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage, although I'm not there. I'm in the old farmhouse in Vermont, in order to talk about the comic books on which Michael wasted his youth and I wasted my adulthood. And we bounce all around. I glommed this process onto a series of videos that Michael was already doing about Epic Comic Book Wednesdays, where he was looking through his Epic collections, Marvel's full-color reprint series that's really worth watching out for because they're pricey. They're $40 to $45, but you get beautiful high-quality paper and lots of content for that money. It's worth the money if you're interested in the run or the issues involved. We did a lot of those, and then we went further afield. We ventured further afield, talked about other comics, other collections, other subjects, and also the distinguished competition, DC Comics, not Marvel at all, the home of the real superheroes, the ones who don't need psychotherapy. But today we're going back to our roots. Today we are discussing an Epic collection. It's this. It's a Spider-Man Epic collection called The Goblin Lives. And down at the bottom there, you see all that you need to see. If the cover didn't do it alone, you see all that you need to see. Lee Romita. That's when you can just breathe a deep sigh, because you know you're in pure Spider-Man territory. Not Romita Jr., but his father, John Romita Sr., one of the greatest Spider-Man artists of all time. And the ironic thing is, the only reason I say one of is because his son is also a great Spider-Man artist, grew up to be a great Spider-Man artist. And we'll be getting to John Romita Jr. in due time, I'm sure, because Michael and I are going to do these Epic collections forever. But here we're going back to the swinging 60s. This is collects Spider-Man 53 through 67, I think, and also includes the 2 issues of Spectacular Spider-Man, the magazine that Stan Lee dreamed up and thought maybe there's another part of the market that he could corner. Put out Spider-Man in a magazine because at the time, although he was very proud of the relevancy of the issues that he was crafting, although he was very proud of the emotional heft of some of them, the legitimate emotional heft of some of the stories. And in this collection, in these issues, he's only getting started with the emotional heft part. Although he was proud of that, he was perfectly aware of the fact that in the 60s, adult men walking into a dry goods store or a stationery store or a bookshop would not go to the comic book section. They wouldn't go to the comic book rack. They were still considered things for children. A large group of young men in their late teens and early 20s were getting more and more resentful of that because these aren't for children. But it was still an ironclad prejudice for a long time, and Stan Lee didn't like that. He wanted his work to get everywhere, so he thought maybe a magazine is something I could convince an adult to buy at a newsstand. Also, it would have meant better distribution, wider distribution. This collects 2 issues of that Spectacular Spider-Man magazine, and I have to believe that is why this volume, this Epic collection, came out in 2019. And you might think, if that's the case, that I would say, well, you can just pop online and get a copy of yourself for $5 or something like that, or buy one new from Amazon. But it's not only is it not sold new anymore, but when it's sold used, it's $200 and something. This keeps happening. It's enormously expensive to buy this thing in paperback. I couldn't believe that. When I looked it up and saw that, I thought, that can't be true. So I called my Barnes & Noble. It's taken me a bit of time to remember that my iPhone now works. It didn't work for 2 or 3 years. Now it works again. I got it seen to by my guy Kenny. So I can make phone calls on my phone. So I called my Barnes & Noble and read them the ISBN and said, what do you think? Is that available? And she said, no, it most certainly is not. So this thing's going to set you back. But I still want to take you through some of the issues, because there's quite a bit to talk about here. And fortunately, I have a lot of the issues electronically, so that we can zoom in on panels. This particular Epic collection is odd. The Epic collections, I think, were originally designed to be different from the Marvel Masterworks. The Marvel Masterworks is also a full-color reprint line. It's hardcover, but it's marching straight forward in chronological order. Just remorselessly forward. So Spider-Man isn't done yet in Marvel Masterworks, but you wouldn't get a volume, they wouldn't be jumping around, whereas the Epic collections do jump around. You can get an epic collection that collects, for instance, the all new, all different X-Men, the Dark Phoenix saga, that volume could occur self-contained before they print the volume of the first adventures of the X-Men. Because the epic collection seemed, at least on the surface, to be all about runs, which is the thing we've talked about for you non-comic book fans. We've talked about this, although I don't know how, I always want to say I don't know how many people who aren't comic book fans watch these videos, but I've had emails from so many of you over the years saying, yeah, I've never read a comic and I'm not interested in reading a comic, but I love hearing you talk about them. All right, fine. Fine. But for you comic book fans will know, there's a thing called a run in any kind of long-standing title. They're not identical. I know that if you don't know anything about comics and you're thinking about, like, for instance, Captain Marvel, where literally every issue looks the same, then you might think, well, there's no such thing as a run. And that's because the old style, Golden Age DC comics, their editors, their writers, their artists, very much didn't like the idea of a run. Of course, your comic had to be exactly the same as it was when your kids were, when your father was a kid. That all changed with Marvel Comics, as did so much. And suddenly, it was possible to have something called a run, where the artist and the writer really achieve a simpatico, and suddenly they get what they want to do. Suddenly they have it sounds really poncy to say, but a bigger vision of what they're trying to do. And it can really change a comic book run, really can. So that, like, for instance, let's take a typical example, it might be the Avengers, which started out terrible. I did a demolition video about how terrible it started out, and then had a run where all of a sudden where all of a sudden Stan Lee changed artists. He got Don Heck as an artist, and suddenly things changed. Suddenly the book changed and felt different, felt better. And you can tell when you look at it, that happens many times throughout the Avengers history, where there'll be a run and then there'll be a fallow period. And you can definitely tell when you're in a fallow period. And you can definitely tell almost to the single issue when a run begins, when suddenly the writer and artist know they've got something special going on. And Marvel's Epic Collection seems to be built in order to capture runs. Otherwise, why would you even care about doing something out of chronological order? It'd be because you want to go from run to run to run. At least that's how I originally thought. But volumes like this really give the lie to that, because this is not a run. These issues are not. I mean, Michael K Vaughan, in his video about these comics, I will leave a link to it down below, he starts out by saying this is a great graphic novel, but when you listen to him talk about the issues, it doesn't sound like it's all that great, and there's a reason for that, because it's not. There are a couple of great moments. And there's one great issue. The second issue of Spectacular Spider-Man is pretty great. But mostly these things are waiting around. Mostly they're feeling things out. The issues that take place directly after this, from 68 to 100, I would say, or 68 to 90, really are a run. And they have long, involved storylines that really do get to you. But there's nothing like that in these issues. These issues are the stories of, well, a string of isolated villains. The first one is Dr. Octopus. Oh, God. Enter Dr. Octopus, where you have John Romita drawing the standard Spider-Man villain, Dr. Octopus, who has metal arms coming out of his side. And the credits here are Stan Lee and John Romita for the writing and the art, but then the inking is listed here as Mickey DeMeo, a name that's unknown to me, and that isn't true, because there's a thing that you need to know about John Romita Sr. Long before he had the actual title and official responsibilities of being Marvel's art coordinator, which is a position he had for years, but long before that, he was the mother of all tinkerers. He was a very nice guy, from all accounts, a very, very nice guy, but he was over the shoulder, metaphorically, of every Marvel artist for years, looking to touch up a thing here and there, fix a thing here and there, unless the artist was so wildly incongruent with his own style. At the very beginning of Gene Colan's run on Marvel Comics, John Romita would sometimes touch up some of his stuff, but Colan was quickly metamorphosing into a writer who's so different, or an artist who's so different from Romita that it would stick out like a sore thumb, which Romita didn't want. It wasn't a control freak thing that he wanted. He was just from that era where comics had a standard visual style book. and you don't deviate from it. So artists like Steve Ditko or Gene Colan, he largely left alone. But anybody else, no. And that also applied to inkers. I don't know Mickey DeMeo from A Hole in the Wall. It sounds like a fake name. But I know that is Mickey DeMeo inking. Sure. Okay. See, there you go. There's Spider-Man throwing the newspaper back in J. Jonah Jameson's face. But this is John Romita inking himself. Mickey DeMeo is nowhere to be found there. And I think that's probably because Mickey DeMeo did ink these pages. That's Gwen Stacy and Flash Thompson. And Romita saw it and didn't like it. And so just fixed it himself. And you get that all throughout these issues. Where he will just sort of, I thought I spotted, okay, here you go. See, stuff like this. A page like this. Not Romita's best work, but that's clearly this DeMeo guy inking him. But then you get just literally the next page. Here is Peter Parker and Flash Thompson squaring off against each other, and there you have John Romita just sort of stepping in and inking his own work. He was fantastic at inking his own work, but he was such a perfectionist that if you got him to ink his own work, it suddenly became very, very slow. You wouldn't get your issue in time. He was also really, really good to ink other people's work. There are a couple, only a couple, but boy, I wish there were more. There are a couple of utterly fantastic Spider-Man issues, decades after this collection here, where John Romita Sr. inks his son. And those issues are incredible. They're absolutely incredible. It's a feast, just a feast for the eye. But the first villain that really happens in this story is Dr. Octopus, who returns and rents a room in the house of Peter Parker's frail, sickly Aunt May. She has a room for rent, and she rents it to Dr. Octopus and seems genuinely fond of him. And that plotline recurs a decade later when she is thinking about marrying Dr. Octopus. So it was kind of weird. It emphasizes the weird ripples in a pond nature of Peter Parker's life in Spider-Man. It's so many of the people in his personal orbit are involved in both his story as Peter Parker and his story as Spider-Man. You almost think that if there ever came an issue where there is actually an issue, I don't think it's in this volume, there is an issue where Peter Parker is delirious with the flu, I think, and just walks in on everybody in his Spider-Man costume and says, I'm Spider-Man. There's another issue where he's fighting Dr. Octopus and briefly loses. Dr. Octopus pulls his mask off in front of everybody, in front of Godmother and Country, and it's Peter Parker. He manages to worm out of both of those, but you always expect, given this, I mean, his friend Harry Osborn is the son of Norman Osborn, who is the Green Goblin. And Norman Osborn is often at their dorm room. He's often at their dinner tables. They know each other. Peter Parker's college professor, Kurt Connors, is the Lizard. He becomes the Lizard. Another college professor later on becomes the Jackal. Harry Osborn eventually becomes the Green Goblin on his own. It gets to the point where you honestly think that if there were an issue where Peter Parker just decided to reveal, there is a famous issue where he decides to reveal that he is Spider-Man, but I mean for real, where he decides to reveal, to tell everybody, to get them all together and say, hey, I'm Spider-Man, you get the impression that if he did that, everyone would say, well, yeah, it couldn't have been anyone else. We've all the rest of us have secret identities. You're the only one who didn't, so you must be Spider-Man. It's like it reminds me of that classic, there was a classic Action Comics issue from long before you were born, where a villain threatens Lois Lane. The villain is trying to threaten Superman and reveals to Lois Lane that Clark Kent is Superman. And she looks at him and says, what makes you think I didn't already know that? But anyway, Dr. Octopus is the first of the villains here. And it's not a very good... Dr. Octopus has had some wonderful, epic appearances. This is not one of them. Aside from the weird curveball of him renting a room in Peter Parker's house. Aside from that, because... that is ridiculous on so many levels. Then the villains that crop up in here, there are really four. The villains who crop up, the major villains, are interspersed with issues where somebody sicks somebody on Spider-Man. There's the one issue where J. Jonah Jameson sicks Kazar on Spider-Man, and Zabu, Kazar's saber-toothed tiger. Don't I have any idea where Zabu is coming from there? He can't fly. It's ridiculous. Kazar is ridiculous anyway. There's no real way to write Kazar the way he was originally created without him being ridiculous. The only way that was ever possible to write this character well, convincingly, was the brief run on his own magazine decades after this, where the writer didn't write him in character at all. Then it worked, but it doesn't work here. Spider-Man against basically bargain basement Tarzan is ridiculous. Kazar is a Tarzan ripoff. He is from the savage land. He is just an ordinary man with no shirt on, which means that Spider-Man can lift 10 tons over his head. There wouldn't be any contest. Zabu, the saber-toothed tiger, is just a large lion with saber teeth. That's all. He's not smarter than anybody. He's not anything like that. Spider-Man has super speed, super strength. And also webbing. It would be easy for him to beat both of these people, and he does. But nevertheless, Stan Lee drags it out for a whole issue. And this, you have, the artwork is by John Romita, but the inking is by Don Heck, who can be a really great artist on his own. But as we're going to be seeing, he's not a good inker, especially not a good inker for John Romita. But nevertheless, we get this issue where Kazar tracks Spider-Man throughout the city and then attacks him. It's no contest whatsoever, but nevertheless, Stan Lee manages to stretch it out across the whole issue, and then it keeps going. I want to get to another issue here, because although this is John Romita artwork, and although that is fantastic, look at this, oh my god, it's John Romita artwork, but it's Don Heck doing the inking. Look at that. What is behind Kazar in that panel, and what is that animal? And maybe if John Romita isn't comfortable drawing a saber-toothed tiger, if you're his inker, it's your job to fix that problem, not to just show it to the world. What's behind him? Some sort of curtain? Bunch of smog? Look at how bad this is. Don Heck is not a good inker, especially not for an artist that's 10 times better than he is. But nevertheless, although he is not a good inker, it continues throughout almost this whole run and ruins it. And look at this. That is just awful. I mean, that is just awful. Look at the inking job that's there. What are those metal highlights? They don't even make it look like metal. In fact, it looked more like metal before he inked it at all than it does after. That's just embarrassing. And unfortunately, that ruins these issues. They have their dramatic high points and low points, but it ruins these issues. And you get a couple of issues where Stan Lee decides to break up the action by having someone attack Spider-Man for no reason. Kazar is told this guy's bad, so he goes and hunts Spider-Man, but Kazar is actually a hero. So it's kind of dumb. It's a little weird. And that happens again a few issues later when Stan Lee has Medusa of the Inhumans attack Spider-Man for no reason whatsoever. In fact, her reason is worse than Kazar's. Kazar is told to attack Spider-Man by J. Jonah Jameson, the publisher of a major newspaper. Medusa is told to attack Spider-Man by the maker of hairspray products. He wants her to be the face of his hairspray line that'll put him on the map and make him $1 million. And for some reason, he thinks the good idea to boost those sales would be to have her attack Spider-Man. Of course, it happens before anyone knows that she's connected with his company, so it doesn't make any sense. It's just that Stan Lee wanted to break up the action and have someone fight Spider-Man. So he wants that so badly that he starts off the issue by having Spider-Man is swinging through the city, and the air car that Medusa is riding on slices his web and briefly imperils his life. She isn't attacking him. She didn't mean to do that. She tries to save his life. She lands him on a roof. And the whole question that you're asking when you paid your 12 cents for this thing is, why didn't Spider-Man see her? Or his spider sense? What happened to his spider sense? But eventually, of course, they end up fighting. She comes to Manhattan in order to make nice with the humans. She wants the humans, her people, to come out of hiding and integrate with human beings. And she can't think of any better way to do that than to make herself known to humans. So she does. She saves little boy. The crowd starts to like her, and she thinks, well, if they like me now, they'll like me even more if I'm a hairspray spokesperson. So she becomes one and fights Spider-Man. And in the course of fighting Spider-Man, pretty much all by herself, just because of Spider-Man, in the course of fighting Spider-Man, she decides humans are crazy and we don't want anything to do with them. So her whole mission is aborted because she fights with Spider-Man. So I don't know that she herself said in this issue that he's not a good representative of humanity, but she appears to make her decision based on him. But mainly the plot lines go to the villains. We had Dr. Octopus. We have a weird 2 issues with the Vulture, a Spider-Man villain who has a power pack between his shoulder blades that powers the wings that he uses to fly. Why that doesn't fill him with joy. Why he doesn't patent that so that everyone can fly. So we're living in a world where everyone can fly. Why he doesn't do that and just become a multi-squillionaire, no idea. But the Vulture is kind of interesting among Spider-Man's supervillains because he's old. You might not think that if you only know him from Michael Keaton movie, but he's old. He's an old man. And the one thing that's never explained about the Vulture in any of his incarnations is why he's so tough. He seems almost superpowered when all he is an old guy in a flying harness. And that quality is highlighted in the issues that we see here in this collection, because there is a younger guy who tries to become the Vulture. All you have to do is put on the pack and learn how to fly it, and then you can be the Vulture. How that's going to save you from robbing banks and terrorizing the city when any cop on a beat can just shoot you out of the sky, I don't know. But in the 2 issues where the Vulture appears here, Spider-Man plays a distant bit part. It's mainly Vulture against Vulture. And the younger, stronger Vulture loses. The older guy, the older Vulture, beats the paste out of him. And the younger Vulture is commenting, how can you be this strong? But it's never explained. It is true, but it's never explained. Another villain that turns up in these issues is the Kingpin, who butts us against the 21st century moralizing censors. Some of those people are just about at the literary level where they can work their way through a comic book if they're moving their lips the whole time. And they've realized that in a lot of these older issues, when Spider-Man faces the Kingpin, he makes all sorts of fat jokes. Now, they didn't read any farther than that before they want to dig up Stan Lee and cancel him, dig up John Romita and cancel him, and cancel anyone who even says the word Spider-Man or Kingpin or both, because it's fat shaming. Never mind that if they had read the issues, they would see that Stan Lee was way ahead of them, as he was usually way ahead of scolds and censors. They had plenty in his own day, where he was making sure to tell us that the Kingpin is not fat. It looks like fat, but it's solid muscle, which is why he's able to go toe-to-toe with Spider-Man, even though he himself is not technically superhuman. And B, Stan Lee goes out of his way to have Peter Parker tell us that he wouldn't throw such taunts at a fat person unless they were a supervillain and he was trying to distract them. That's all. It's just patter. Spider-Man does that sort of thing to distract his villains so that he can get the upper hand and put them in jail. Probably the blue-haired, blue checkmark scolds who hate the fat shaming in these issues are also against jails for Kingpins. So maybe that we lose all the way around. But the main villain in these issues doesn't really appear until the end. And even then, as Michael points out in his video, only in a self-contained story. The main villain in these issues is skillfully woven throughout all of these issues. I would argue it's the only skillful thing that happens anywhere in these issues. And that villain is Norman Osborn, a wealthy industrialist. Here we have him arguing with J. Jonah Jameson at their club. They belong to the same gentleman's club. And here we get a nice characterization of J. Jonah Jameson. J. Jonah Jameson is a shark. He is crass and opportunistic, but Stan Lee never portrays him, even when he's making him don a suit of armor to capture Spider-Man. He never portrays Jameson as just a bad guy. And we have it in this panel. He knows that something's bothering Norman Osborn. He said, "Is something I can do to help?" And Osborn says, "Just get away. Don't butt in with my problems," and pushes him away. And in the next panel, Jameson says, "What's gotten into him? That chemical plant he makes him one of the richest men in town. So what's he upset about? I'd like to find out, because he's my friend and I want to help him." Followed immediately by, "And maybe there's a story in it." But the thing that's bothering Norman Osborn in this issue and in many issues throughout the issues anthologized here stems from an earlier issue where he captures Spider-Man, ties him to a chair with titanium wire so that it takes him a while to break free, and unmasks him. Simple as that. Captures him and unmasks him so that he now knows that Spider-Man is Peter Parker, that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and as luck would have it, as Stan Lee's weird interconnected world would have it, when he unmasked Spider-Man, it turns out that it's someone that Norman Osborn knows. It's a kid that he's had over to the house many, many times. It's his son's best friend. How you could miss such a thing, I do not know. Reading these issues again reminded me that at the time that these issues are, and for every issue before this, Peter Parker's living in Aunt May's house in the suburbs. It's a normal two-story house like this one. Imagine going up into one of the bedrooms of this old house in Vermont, stripping to a Spider-Man costume, and then what? And then what? How does Spider-Man get to New York City from there? Surely he takes the train. But no, he seems to web-sling his way all the way back to Aunt May's house, and from it, which would mean he'd be getting into costume, heaving up the windowsill, and leaping out. He'd have to jump from roof to roof. There isn't anything to web himself to. And every neighbor would know. Every neighbor would know. Within 5 minutes, May would be getting 10 phone calls from people saying, "Do you know some guy dressed like a spider just jumped out of your bedroom? It looked like it was Peter's bedroom." In the climax of that issue, where Green Goblin, where Norman Osborn realizes that Peter Parker's Spider-Man, there is an explosion and he has amnesia. Because you must never forget when you're reading these stories, no matter how good they are, they're written by Stan Lee. And there was never a narrative gimmick he didn't like. And there was never one he didn't use, including amnesia. Norman Osborn has amnesia, but it's not a very good kind of amnesia. It's not a very good kind of amnesia. All throughout these issues, he is haunted by visions. And the visions always take the same form. And they are of the Green Goblin, for some reason. Why is Norman Osborn dreaming about the Green Goblin? That part doesn't make any sense. And the other part of the dream is having a muscular teenager tied to a chair. I think you'll all agree that makes a certain kind of sense. but this part doesn't. Why would Green Goblin be in the story? And in every Norman Osborn flashback, in all of these issues, we always get that. When the action is going on elsewhere, let me see if I can find you another one. It won't be in the Medusa issue, but it's in almost every issue. Okay, all right. I want to give Don Heck props here. Michael K. Vaughan points this out as well. That is one heck of a splash panel. I will admit that. But it doesn't stay that good at all. Let me see if I can find you another one, because it happens all throughout. It happens all throughout these issues where, in addition to everything else that's going on, there's one vulture, then there's two. Yeah, here we go. Very next issue. Again, Norman Osborn is seeing the Green Goblin tormenting a tied-up muscular teenager. And you can see, slowly but surely, the shadow is rising on that figure. Slowly we're getting to that figure's face. But Norman Osborn can't make it out. He can't figure out why he's thinking of this. And Peter Parker's worried too, of course, because that means, that Norman Osborn is getting closer and closer to remembering that he's the Green Goblin, which would be really bad. It'd be really bad for everybody. But I want to show you, let me see. Okay, all right, perfect example. But that tension builds to the second issue of Spectacular Spider-Man, where Norman Osborn, in a great climactic moment, does remember, briefly, before he gets amnesia again, he remembers that he's the Green Goblin. Of course, he is going to remember completely, permanently, down the line. That's just too good a story for Stan Lee to pass up. And those two issues of Spectacular Spider-Man are in this epic collection. I can't help but think they might be the reason why the thing has become so absurdly expensive on the secondhand market. $200 for this thing. I can't help but think that's the reason why. Because Marvel doesn't often reprint those issues, and they are kind of interesting, in a way. One way or another, if you want to just grab this, you're going to have to pay out for it, which I don't like at all. I'd almost be willing to think that if you went to a comic book convention or your local comic book back issue store, you might be able to get a lot of these single issues together for more than the price of this collection. So let that be a lesson to you. In addition to anything else that we're going to look at for today, let that be a lesson to you that if an epic collection comes along, you see it in your local comic shop, or you see it in a listing of new comics for that week, and it interests you, grab it. Because apparently there's a very active collector's market for these things. Don't expect, I expected that since it was only 2 or 3 years old, that it would still be in print and I'd still be able to buy it. I'd be able to buy it at my Barnes & Noble. No, don't expect that. Grab them right away. The epic collections per week are not always good. The one from last week, I think, was a dumb Hawkeye issue, a dumb Hawkeye collection that you wouldn't cross the street, you wouldn't pick it up off the sidewalk. But every once in a while, they are. I will keep you posted on the week's epic collections. This week, well, today, the Bean and I are working all day here in the old house in Vermont. Everybody's got their stuff to do. We are being paid the enormous personal compliment of being treated like family. So nothing special. No one. There is no family council when we're not around saying how do we keep them entertained 24 hours a day. Nothing like that at all. People just go about their business. They know perfectly well that Frida's whole world is me, and I work all day long. So I it's not like I can just frolic all day long. I've got stuff to do. So I don't know that we're going to get to the comic shop today, and it doesn't sound to me like the next 2 days are going to be very good for traveling. You'll do it if you have to, but I think there's going to be snow and sleet the next 2 days, even here in Vermont. Nothing compared to what the rest of you are going to be. A lot of people in this country, millions of people, are going to be getting a foot of snow and really bad wind and sleet, but I don't think we're going to get that in Vermont. I don't think we're going to get to the comic shop, and I don't think there's an Epic collection this week. I could be wrong about that, but I don't think so. There are a couple of really good ones coming up. Oh my, really good ones. I'll keep you posted, but I want to show you what I mean about inking, because the reason why I would never pay $200 for this Epic collection, in addition to having them digitally, and also individually. I have these individual issues in a box at Hyde Cottage somewhere, but the reason why I would never pay that exorbitant price, I was willing to pay half price for the paperback at Barnes & Noble, is because the presence of Don Heck all throughout, marring John Romita's work, ruins it for me. And I want to show you what I mean, because when John Romita gets a different inker, it's a totally different story. I want to show you. Let me see if I can find an issue. The one that I gravitated to immediately was a different inker, but it was also a different artist. There's John Buscema, and we don't want that. Let's find a John Romita issue that has a different inker, so I can show you what I mean. Oh God! All right, I'm not finding them now. Here, let me backtrack a bit. Okay, finally, I think I've finally succeeded here. A little bit washed out, but you'll be able to see what I mean. Yes, okay, all right. The next issue, the very next issue after this collection ends, Don Heck goes away. I think because he was drawing the Avengers. I'm pretty sure the timing is right for that. Either way, whatever the reason was, John Romita gets a better inker. He gets Jim Mooney, who's also a fairly good artist, but he's about the level of Don Heck as an artist, but he's a terrific inker. It really brings out the shadow and the texture. Now, you're not going to be able to... It looks like this scan of the comic is a little washed out, but you're still going to be able to see it. Unless maybe the next issue is a little bit better, so that I'm not wasting your time any more than I already am. Let's see if the next issue is better. A little bit... Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Much better. All right. Glad I didn't. Look what Jim Mooney does with the inks here. Just incredible. Just look at that. It's just incredibly better than what was happening with Don Heck. Just incredibly better. Look at that. That is just that you can see just in the contrast in this video the mess that Don Heck would have made of that panel alone. And instead, it doesn't happen. Jim Mooney is just a better inker for this artist. And that makes a difference. So, I'm a huge fan of John Romita's artwork, but a lot matters. The inker matters. You have to have a good inker and also the right inker for you. It doesn't matter if you have a terrific inker if they're not right for your style. Like, for instance, there was an inker at this time a little bit later than this at Marvel called Rudy Nebres, who's fantastic. But if you put him on Gil Kane, you're going to get a mess. If you put him on the wrong artist, you're going to get a mess. But anyway, look at the time. So there we go. That is. Let me get back to the picture of our Epic collection for today. Oh, there we go. That is our Epic collection for today. The Goblin Lives. Which is a bit of false advertising because you have to go through a whole lot of Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy relationship troubles before you get to the Goblin living. And mostly in this issue, the Goblin doesn't so much live as daydream about tied-up muscular teenagers. For issue after issue after issue, half of every issue of which is Stan Lee just channeling his old successes at romance comics by having Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy go through one bit of dating turmoil after another. It's heartfelt. It's well done. I'm not saying that it will waste your time, but you'll definitely notice that these are not all action fests, these issues. Half of them are taken up with the relationship stuff. But there you go. That is our epic collection for today. The Goblin Lives. Classic Spider-Man, marred for me by the execution of the artwork. There are two kinds of people who read comic books. There are people who read mostly for the artwork and people who read mostly for the story. I fully admit I read mostly for the artwork. If it's bad artwork, I don't care how good the story is. I won't keep reading it. So for me, this collection is a bit of a miss. But still, Paradise compared to some of the crap on a stick that Michael could pick. He's the one doing the picking. Who knows what he'll pick for next week? We're on a bit of a run. I was happy to talk about these issues. They're not my favorite Spider-Man issues, but I was happy to talk about them. And the last few have been great. We shall see. We shall see what Michael has in store for all of us next time. So I'll wrap this up at long last, and I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.